It was a crisp spring evening in Glasgow, Scotland, when a girl walked out of a club and simply disappeared into the night. We are talking about Karen Buckley, a nursing student taken way too soon, and the cold-blooded predator who ended it all. Ready to dive into the grimmest tales from across the pond? Check out our latest release, Unreal True Crime British Edition. It features 35 jaw-dropping homicide files guaranteed to keep you up all night. You can snag it right now on Amazon in print or Kindle, or just download the PDF directly from our site. Check the description for the links and grab yours before they are gone. Now, let us get back to the story. Karen Buckley entered the world in 1993 down in Cork, Ireland. She was raised in Mourne Abbey, a tiny country town sitting just north of the main city. It was one of those close farming towns where everybody knows your name and neighbors actually watch your back. John and Marion Buckley had 4 kids, with Karen being the baby of the family and the only girl. Being raised alongside 3 big brothers in the quiet Irish boonies gave her a sweet nature that nobody ever forgot. Her early years were spent hanging out at the local rec center, running around the Green Hills with her pals and siblings. People always said she was incredibly sweet and caring, the type of person who was always smiling and ready to lend a hand. Her folks were devout churchgoers, and those lessons about kindness really molded who she became as a person. Over at St. Mary's High School, she was smart as a whip and super popular, so making buddies was a breeze. She was bubbly and real, keeping close ties with her peers while they bonded over hobbies and hung out together. The girl had goals and plenty of drive. She knew early on that she wanted to assist folks and really matter. That urge pushed her toward nursing, which fit her caring personality like a glove. Once she finished high school, she signed up at the University of Limerick to get her nursing degree. While hitting the books, she waited tables at a nearby hotel, showing off the hustle that defined her 20s. She put in the time and finally got her registered nurse license, but she was not done yet. She wanted to go further. She packed her bags for England and landed her first real gig over at the Royal Alexandra Hospital. That is when she fell in love with occupational therapy, helping patients build up the skills they need for everyday life. Wanting to become an expert, she looked around and found a killer master's program for occupational therapy at the University of Glasgow. So in January of 2015, at 24, she headed up to Glasgow to start her classes. It was a totally new chapter, and she dove in with her usual positive attitude. With over 600,000 residents, Glasgow was a massive change from the sleepy town she came from. She got a place with 3 other roommates and settled into the groove pretty fast. She hit the books hard, but still had fun bonding with other foreign students while figuring out the town. When the weekend hit, the crew would roam the city, checking out eateries, sights, and the nightlife scene. They were not going crazy or anything, just doing the typical stuff grad students do. Come April 2015, 3 months in, she was feeling at home and making a life for herself. Saturday, April 11th, 2015, began just like any other weekend. The plan was to hit up a club named Sanctuary, and they got there right around 11:45 that night. Things were chill for a while. She was talking, laughing, dancing, and sipping drinks with 0 red flags. Then, past 1 in the morning, the vibe shifted when she told her group she needed the restroom. They barely blinked, but she never actually went. Instead, she walked right out the door into the cold without a coat. What made her bail without saying a word? And why would she leave her coat behind? We still have no clue. Even with the guy caught and the case closed, that part is a total riddle. Was she creeped out by someone? Did she get a weird text? We are never going to find out. Her buddies realized she was gone, but they did not hit the panic button right away. In a packed venue with alcohol flowing, they figured she probably felt sick and just headed back. It made sense at the time, but by Sunday, April 12th, fear kicked in when her roomies saw she was missing. She never slept in her bed. Her cell went straight to voicemail, and her online profiles were dead silent. That was totally unlike her, since she was usually the type to keep in touch. Her circle instantly knew something was off, and the vibe was terrifying. Without wasting a second, they dialed the authorities to file a formal missing persons report. Law enforcement in Glasgow didn't brush this off as just some party girl staying out too late. The details surrounding the case immediately set off major alarm bells for the detectives. Sensible, 24-year-old grad students don't just disappear into thin air without a trace. Detectives knew time was critical, so they reached out to her folks back in Ireland within hours. John and Marion Buckley got the phone call that every mother and father dreads receiving. Their little girl was gone, lost somewhere in a country that wasn't her home. They barely waited a couple of days before catching a flight to Glasgow to join the hunt. Meanwhile, the official inquiry was shifting into overdrive as the clock kept ticking down. Officers scoured the neighborhood, grilled her buddies, and pored over hours of surveillance tape. The evidence they uncovered sent a shiver down everyone's spine. Video feeds showed her walking out of the sanctuary club right around 1 a.m. However, she had company strolling alongside a guy who seemed to be chatting her up. The dude looked like he was doing all the talking as they headed away from the venue in the opposite direction of her place. That single detail completely flipped the script on the case. She hadn't just wandered off into the darkness by herself like some people assumed. A stranger had clearly successfully lured her away into the shadows of the city night. The hunt for answers ramped up with desperate intensity. Pictures of her smiling face were plastered on news channels all over Scotland and back home in Ireland too. Her relatives put together massive groups to sweep the streets. Regular folks were out scouring Glasgow, while the internet blasted her photo to millions of users instantly. People were praying for a happy ending, but as the days dragged on, that optimism started to crumble. Authorities didn't take long to put a name to the face from the video. They zeroed in on Alexander Pacteau, a 21-year-old local guy living in the city. Just a few days after she vanished, investigators showed up at his front door. As soon as the cops stepped across the threshold, they got hit with a weird sensation, specifically the overpowering stench of bleach mixed with heavy industrial cleaners. The whole flat smelled like a hospital ward, like it had just been scrubbed within an inch of its life. That level of cleanliness was an immediate red flag for the detectives. Why would a guy's crib smell that sterile unless he was trying to wash away incriminating proof? During that initial sit-down, Pacteau decided to share his side of the story. He alleged that he met up with her outside the club, started talking, and eventually talked her into coming back to his place for a bit. The suspect insisted they hooked up and everything was totally cool between them. Then he claimed she just walked out the door around 4 a.m. To the seasoned pros on the case, his story smelled fishier than the bleach. It made no sense that a smart girl who just stepped out to use the restroom would run off with a random dude. Why in the world would she head back to his flat without giving her friends a single heads up? And if she supposedly walked out of there breathing, where the heck was she hiding? Once the cops started digging deeper, they found sheets stained with blood. The guy had a convenient excuse lined up and ready to go immediately. He swore she just bumped her head on the bed frame in a clumsy little accident. Even with his smooth talking, he quickly became the #1 suspect on their radar. Officers threw him in holding while they worked on building a solid case against him. Then they found something even creepier. A handwritten script laying out exactly what he told the cops. It was his entire alibi written out line by line on paper. That little note screamed that he was calculating his moves way in advance. It looked like a cheat sheet he made to memorize his lies so he wouldn't trip up. While the suspect cooled his heels in a jail cell, the detective work outside didn't stop for a second. The team kept hunting for the missing girl, holding on to a shred of hope she was okay. But the situation got grim when they stumbled upon her personal items. Someone located her handbag and gear dumped near Dachshund Park. That was totally the wrong way from where she actually lived. That discovery blew a massive hole in his claim that she had walked home. Why would her stuff be miles away unless someone tossed it there on purpose? The big break finally arrived thanks to a tip from one of the suspect's work buddies. He mentioned the guy rented a farm storage unit in High Craigton for fireworks supplies. That tip gave the squad a solid target to hit immediately. It was a secluded spot way out of town, perfect for hiding something you didn't want found. On April 16th, 2015, just 5 days after she vanished, the police force swarmed High Craigton Farm. The things they uncovered there made their darkest nightmares a reality. Inside a plastic drum sitting on the land, the search team found the remains of Karen Buckley. The bright young nurse who had moved to the city with such big dreams was gone forever. It was a cold-blooded homicide, plain and simple. The coroner ruled that she died from severe blunt force trauma to her skull. She had been bashed repeatedly with something heavy, causing injuries she couldn't survive. With the body recovered and the forensic proof undeniable, his lies completely fell apart. Staring down a mountain of incriminating evidence, he finally broke down and confessed to the crime. The actual truth was way darker and more twisted than anyone imagined. After they left the club, he managed to lure her back to his flat, but nothing that happened there was consensual in the slightest. He brutally attacked her using a large metal wrench he had handy. He hit her in the head over and over again until the damage was fatal. Once she was gone, he went into cleanup mode with terrifying efficiency. The killer bought a drum and loaded it up with harsh chemicals like caustic soda. He was trying to dissolve her remains to make sure nothing was left to find. He hauled her body all the way out to that farm and stuffed her into the chemical-filled barrel. He wasn't finished yet, though. He went back to his place and scrubbed everything with bleach to wipe out any blood or DNA traces. That was exactly why the detectives got hit with those burning chemical fumes the second they walked in. He took the bloodied linens out and torched them to destroy the proof. As for the wrench, he tossed the weapon into a canal while he was driving out to the farm. Showing he was fully aware of his guilt and calculating his next steps, Pactel scrubbed his vehicle down and posted an ad online to get rid of it. He was wiping away forensic traces and severing any ties to the weapon used in Karen's death. As the evidence piled up, detectives started digging into his past. The things they uncovered were absolutely chilling. Turns out this wasn't the first time he had targeted a female victim. There was a paper trail of dangerous aggression that the courts had completely failed to address. Back in 2011, 4 years prior to killing Karen, he faced charges for trying to violate a girl in Glasgow. The details of that night were terrifyingly familiar. He encountered his target in the wee hours of November 27th, 2011, right after she exited a club known as Garage. Employing the exact same playbook he would later use on Karen, he managed to lower her guard. He claimed he needed a cab and talked her into splitting the ride with him. However, once they were in a dark alley, he made his move. Reports indicate he pinned her to the pavement, stifled her cries, and tried to force himself on her. Her desperate yelling drew the attention of strangers nearby who sprinted over to assist. They discovered the victim caked in dirt and obviously in a state of shock. The suspect attempted to make a run for it by ducking behind a parked van, but police quickly apprehended him. Authorities subsequently slapped him with an attempted rape charge. That moment really ought to have been the point where the court stepped in to keep other ladies safe from this guy. But sadly, things did not play out that way. Once the proceedings kicked off in 2013, the defendant formally denied the accusations. The strategy his legal team used was incredibly bold and calculated. He argued that assaulting someone was a weak move, and stated he would actually prefer facing a homicide charge. He swore that if he were actually guilty, he would just own up to it. He maintained that he was a guy who planned his moves and would never jeopardize his freedom like that. And then Pactel spun a completely different version of events. The story he told was that she lashed out after he inquired about her partner, causing them both to tumble behind a vehicle where he just happened to land on her. As for fleeing the scene, he insisted he only bolted because he was in a panic and terrified. Pulling a seriously cunning move, he informed the jurors that he was actually gay, implying that he had zero. However, right before a final judgment could be handed down, a legal technicality completely threw a wrench in the proceedings. A technical failure with the courtroom audio gear meant the jury failed to hear the victim's statement clearly. That factor, coupled with postponements following a major wreck Pactel was involved in, resulted in the charges being thrown out. That crash in 2012 was critical, keeping him in a coma for a month with a fractured hip and ribs. He was laid up for 6 months and stuck hobbling around on crutches for a whole year. His legal team tried to spin that into a mental health defense, but the doctors declared him totally sane and fit for trial. However, a few technical glitches handed his defense lawyers the exact loophole they were looking for. Since the jury wasn't allowed to hear the most critical testimony, the case fell apart, charges were dropped, and he walked free. That failure of the justice system turned deadly, because if they had locked him up in 2013, he would have still been inside in April 2015. Karen Buckley would still be here today, and while knowing his background explains some things, it doesn't excuse his violence. Pactel was just 21 years old when he took Karen's life. He grew up middle class and went to a fancy private school, but his parents split when he was a kid after his dad's business went under. He mostly lived with his mom, but that whole arrangement was always pretty shaky. Even with all the advantages of his upbringing, he started heading down a path filled with lies and crime. A year before the murder, he got busted for printing fake tickets after the cops raided his apartment on a tip. He claimed he had been in a car wreck and was simply too embarrassed to admit the truth about his income. Since he was on disability, he pretended to run a successful company and printed fake tickets to keep up the act. Back when he was 17, he tried to launch a furniture company, but it totally flopped. That failure, along with his injuries and lack of a real job, pushed him toward a life of scams and petty theft. He dodged jail time for the fraud and just got slapped with 225 hours of community service. The system gave him another second chance he didn't deserve, and he proved it by getting charged with Karen Buckley's murder. The evidence against him was overwhelming, including the recovery of her body and solid forensic data. Faced with witness testimony and his own confession, he was cornered with no way to claim he was innocent. In September 2015, he stood up in court and formally pleaded guilty to murdering Karen Buckley. By taking the plea, he saved Karen's family from a long trial and the horror of hearing about her final moments. During sentencing, the full extent of his brutal crimes and his calculated cover-up were finally exposed. The magistrate was informed of his systematic destruction of clues, his falsehoods to authorities, and his absolute zero regret. Back in November 2015, the judge handed Alexander Pacteau a life sentence, ordering him to serve at least 23 years before he could even sniff parole. He won't get a chance at freedom until he hits 44, and considering how twisted his crime was, he'll likely rot in a cell forever. The judge didn't mince words during sentencing, making sure everyone understood the horror of Pacteau brutally ending a young woman's life before it really began. He stole Karen's future, ripped a beloved daughter and sister away from her family, and robbed the world of a talented occupational therapist. Even though he is locked up tight, there's still a bunch of disturbing loose ends that keep people up at night. The biggest mystery is why she left the club in the first place. She told her crew she was hitting the restroom, but then walked right out the front door without her coat. Did someone in there creep her out? Or maybe she got a text message that rattled her. Maybe she suddenly felt sick. Sadly, we will probably never know exactly what pulled her out onto the street that night. Another huge question is whether running into him was just bad luck or if he had been hunting her down specifically. Detectives suspect he might have had eyes on her while they were still inside, picking her out as a target long before she stepped outside. Surveillance cameras caught him lingering by his car, phone in hand, looking like a predator, waiting for someone vulnerable to walk out alone. That behavior points to a planned attack, which makes the whole thing even more terrifying. Then there's the question of why he did it. Unlike the incident in 2011 where he tried to sexually assault someone, forensic teams found no signs of that with Karen. So that leaves us wondering about the motive. Criminal psychologists think he might have killed her just to scratch a dark itch because he got a sick thrill from holding total dominance over another human being and snuffing out a life. That profile suggests he isn't just a one-time killer, but a budding serial predator who got caught before he could strike again. Police theorize that he had been playing out these violent scenarios in his head for quite a while. On April 11, 2015, he finally decided to turn those twisted daydreams into a real-world nightmare. He had chemicals in a barrel, all set for disposal, proving he planned the cover-up well in advance rather than acting on impulse. While her relatives carry the deepest pain, the shockwaves of this tragedy rippled out to touch countless others in the community. Her parents, John and Marion, didn't hold back, calling the man a spineless monster and the embodiment of evil. Those labels fit him perfectly. The family now has to survive not only her absence, but the gut-wrenching details of her final moments. Her end was violent and brutal, beaten to death by some random guy she felt safe enough to walk beside for a moment. It is the kind of horror story that keeps parents awake at night. Only for the Buckleys it actually happened. The pals who were out with her at the club that evening are dealing with a heavy load of trauma and regret. It eats at them that they didn't notice she was gone until the clock had already run out. Deep down, they understand it wasn't their fault and that the killer is the only one to blame for his own actions. However, feelings rarely follow facts. Meanwhile, this disaster exposed some major cracks in the legal system over in Scotland. Had the courts nailed him for that attack back in 2011, he would have been sitting in a cell instead of roaming the streets in 2015. She would have finished her graduate degree and gone on to become a professional therapist. Thousands of patients would have benefited from her care, and she would have enjoyed the long, happy life she was supposed to have. But because of legal loopholes and delays tied to a car crash he was in, he walked free when he should have been locked up. His previous victim showed guts by standing up in court to identify him, yet the legal process completely let her down. That systemic screw-up ended up signing Karen's death warrant, making this case a heartbreaking disaster from every angle. It is a tale of a bright, hopeful girl whose future was snatched away by an act of random brutality. It shows how one monster's choices can obliterate a life and leave a whole town and family in ruins. It also serves as a grim reminder that when the courts drop the ball, innocent people can end up dead. She went to the city with big dreams of a career in healthcare. Folks remember her as the sweetest, most giving person you could meet. She embodied everything good about people, while he stands for the absolute darkest parts of human nature. He is a straight-up wolf who proved his danger years ago by assaulting another female, yet nobody stopped him, and the system let him stay loose long enough to kill. Now her family focuses on her beautiful spirit rather than her tragic end. They set up a scholarship to support other nursing students, making sure her name lives on through the kindness she always valued. As for the killer, he is rotting in a cage exactly where he should be. He is looking at decades, if not forever, staring at concrete walls as payment for his crimes against that poor girl. Yet, 1,000 years in jail won't bring her home, and no verdict can ever fix the hole left in her family's hearts. True justice in situations of this nature feels completely out of reach. Karen Buckley was just 24 years of age when her life was taken. She ought to be breathing right now. She ought to be employed as an occupational therapist, guiding patients as they reconstruct their futures. She ought to be visiting with her kin back in Ireland, building fresh memories alongside her brothers, parents, and buddies. She deserved the opportunity to find true love, to get hitched, and to raise kids if she so chose. She was supposed to have another 60 years on this earth. Instead, she occupies a plot in Ireland, leaving a family that will mourn forever. That is the heartbreak of Karen Buckley. That is the reason we are obligated to recall her history. We do this not merely to honor a casualty, but to cherish a bright young soul whose flame was snuffed out way too early by a predator who never should have been walking the streets. The life of Karen Buckley counted. The death of Karen Buckley counts. Furthermore, her narrative, as agonizing as it is to recount, counts as well.